All right, Frank. So you're back with a fresh top 75 free agents ranking on dailyfaceoff.com, which will be posted later this afternoon. And one of the big things that, we try to assess, you in particular, with information from the playoffs is how does the market truly view a player? And of those guys, which of them have made themselves a lot more money the way the second half of the season and the playoffs have gone based on where you might have had them earlier this year?
Yeah, well, first I have to give a shout out to AFP Analytics. And if you're not following them already on Twitter, go do so now and check out their spreadsheet. So they're up with their final latest projections from May 20th. This is going to be it heading into July 1. And they do such a good job of trying to answer a question exactly like that. They've got projections that they line up all year. And when you take a look at some guys that have really increased their value, I mean, it's Sean Monahan, it's Jake Gensel, it's Sam Reinhart. Now, the last two guys probably aren't going to be that surprising. Sam Reinhart, magical 56-goal season. Jake Gensel, he gets traded, fits like a glove in Carolina, and puts up some great numbers on top of being a historically strong and consistent performer. But I think this serves as a great reminder of not just the work that Sean Monahan has done to increase his value and get his game back on track after his career was nearly disrailed with some significant injury, but a reminder of the value of centers. I was the guy all, trade deadline period long saying, hey, Sean Monahan is going to get a late first round pick. And people were like, dude, whatever you're smoking, please get me some of that. And he goes for a late first because centers are hard to come by. And he's gotten the production back up to a level, and he's always been responsible where you could see him going from $2.8 million a year in their midseason projection to they have it at 5.3. I'd say probably ends up somewhere in the $5 million range. And if you think back to a few years, like if you heard Sean Monahan and $5 million a year, you wouldn't really blink. But after what he's been through, you'd be like, oh, that's kind of surprising. That's an interesting change. And so a guy that stuck to it, a guy that went to Winnipeg, played well, and a guy who's now put himself in a position to earn some serious money again.
Yeah, I love that story, Frank, because it's cool to see a player that kind of went to the top, came to the bottom, and then pulled himself out of it and came back up to the top, because not every guy has the ability to pull through that. So, all right, buddy, I asked you about the positive. Now we've got to go to the other way. There's players who have cost themselves money over the course of the season. So in that regard, who stands out to you?
No one bigger than Elias Lindholm. And I say that knowing that he had actually a really good playoff for the Vancouver Canucks. He did so many smart, little important things, whether it was a key draw or positioning or chipping in with a huge hit on a forecheck. I loved everything I saw from Elias Lindholm in the playoffs. That said, his production this year took a huge dive. This is a guy who's been an inconsistent producer. He can put up 80-plus points and has shown that he can do that with 40 goals, but 44 points this year. This is a guy that heading into the season was asking the Calgary Flames for $9 million a year on an AAV. The latest projection from AFP Analytics has him down at 6.7 a year times only 5 years. This is a guy who's 30 years old that is in a spot where he's going to need to get paid more. There's a big contract for him, but just look at just these numbers right here. 7 times 8 in January at the midseason to now 5 times 6.7. If you have your calculator out, that's $22 million that he's lost over that period of time. Again, we're talking centers. We're talking really smart players. Could a team go overboard and try and pay him more? Yes, but I think they're going to be concerned about his age. I think they're going to be concerned about his drop in production. And I think there's maybe a little bit of the John Klingberg effect here, where you saw him play a lot worse this season and those numbers begin to drop. That how much does the player internalize and feel, oh my God, I've cost myself a serious amount of money by not signing what was on the table. He was chasing the dough, and now he's in a spot where he's going to still be well paid, but not anywhere near what he once was.
Yeah, well, I certainly never try to look too hard at a guy who didn't transition well after a trade, but this started before the trade during the regular season. So we're not just using a small sample size when we talk about a guy like Elias Lindholm. All right, Frank, let's go a little further down your board. Who's going to jump up and rise this time around that, might be at the point where you stop scrolling?
I was not that high on Chris Tanev at the trade deadline. I was not that high 3 weeks ago when I did my first top 50 board. He was somewhere in the mid 30s in the free agent ranking. And I was like, this is a guy who's a little bit older at 34, doesn't really move all that well, and continues to just take beating after beating. But I know there's no offense here, 1 point in 13 games in the playoffs, but 23 minutes and 41 seconds a night and only a second round pick that it cost the Dallas Stars. He has a chance to be not only the best trade deadline acquisition of the period, but he's a guy that's going to earn himself a pretty decent contract, maybe even more than you might have thought. My guess is probably somewhere in the 3 or 4 years times $4 million a year. And for someone that's been through what he's been through, I think continue to count him out at your own peril. He is just so efficient. I don't think enough is written or said about how little, or I should say how much Chris Tanev underhandles the puck in a really good way. It's on his stick. It's off his stick. It's to the next guy. There's no fancy stick handling. There's no moves. There's nothing that you look at his game and you say, oh my God, that's sexy. That's flashy, whatever it might be. Always willing to block the shot, make the hit. He's not even overly physical because he doesn't need to be. His positioning is so strong. He's a guy that I think has made a believer in not just me, but a lot of teams that I've talked to already saying, man, can you believe the playoff Chris Tanev is having? He's someone that is certainly going to be in demand this summer.
Listen, the best teams have a complement to their star puck-moving offensive defenseman, and that's Chris Tanev. You put him with any one of these number one 80, 90, 100-point scoring defensemen, your Roman Yossi's or whoever else, Makar's, this guy is going to absolutely solidify your back end. So I'm with you, Frank. I've been so impressed with Tanev in these playoffs. I think his impact on games against the other team's top players has just been one of the reasons Dallas has been able to pull themselves out of holes consistently throughout this Western Conference playoff run. So, Frank, with that, the new top 10 of your 75, of your top 75, what does it look like? Can we get a little sneak peek before it gets up on the website, dailyfaceoff.com, a little bit later?
Yeah, so this is what it looks like, and there's some pretty significant changes here. Here's the top 5. Brady Shea, he slides up a little bit after that 47-point year. And one of the big things as we move to the second half of the top 10, no surprise with those couple guys at the top in Gensel and Reinhart, but Lindholm's still on there. But Chandler Stevenson rose up in a big way. Feedback I got from teams was you had him way too low in the mid-teens the first time around. His production is strong. He's really reliable. And the other big change is Joe Pavelski and Patrick Kane slid down the board a little bit. And that isn't necessarily a knock on those guys. Just we're dealing with a 40-year-old and a 36-year-old, and their projections are strong. And Kane still had a great year or portion of a year with the Detroit Red Wings. But I think it's not to say that there's not going to be interest, but the interest is going to be curated from both ways. Younger building teams aren't going to be as interested in these players, and these guys aren't going to be as interested in teams that don't have a chance to contend. So be interested to see what Joe Pavelski looks like the rest of the way for the Stars, as he saw, a little bit of a drop in production this year.
Well, I'm a big Patrick Kane fan, and I think that if you can get him for a couple $1 million and you're a contender, that's a good guy.
It might cost you though. Like he could be making upwards of $5 or $6 million, and all of a sudden it changes. He's certainly got the numbers to point to that and say that he deserves it.
Absolutely. No, look, I'm all about production, age versus cap hit. Like that completely always will change my mind when talking about a player. I think Steven Stamkos is a fascinating name on your board because I just think that whole situation is very unclear what's going to happen there, Frank.
Yeah, agreed. That'll do it for this week's edition of Icebreakers. Thanks, Cole.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Seravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.